They always said there was no room. So I built a table that could hold us. My name is Claire, and for a long time I thought the hardest part of being left out was the silence that followed, the awkward empty space where an invitation should have been, the way your phone doesn't ring, and yet your heart does, again and again, like it still believes someone is about to remember you. I spent years checking my messages, refreshing my email, wondering if perhaps a technical glitch was the reason I hadn't been included. But there was no glitch. There was only a quiet, deliberate exclusion. I wasn't raised in a family that screamed, or threw plates, or slammed doors. My family was the kind that smiled through everything, that wrapped cruelty in polite sentences, that used soft voices like blankets to cover sharp edges, and if you ever tried to say, out loud, that something hurt, they'd look at you with that practiced confusion, like you just accused them of something unimaginable, and then they'd explain, gently, patiently, as if you were a child that you must be misunderstanding. They made you feel like you were the one who was broken, not the family dynamic. I remember my father before he passed away. He was the only one who didn't play the game of polite cruelty. He would take me to get ice cream on Saturdays, just the two of us, and tell me that my imagination was a superpower, not a flaw. But when he died, that shield disappeared. My mother's influence became absolute, and the house grew colder, even in the middle of summer. My mother's name is Margaret, and she's the kind of woman who can say, "I love both my daughters the same," with absolute conviction, while her actions build an entirely different story, brick by brick, year after year, until you stop arguing with the words and start believing the reality instead. She was a woman of appearances. If the neighbors thought we were perfect, then in her mind we were. My sister's name is Rachel. Rachel is older than me by 3 years, and in our family that difference might as well have been a crown, because from the time we were children it felt like everyone decided Rachel was the one who made sense, the one whose life would look correct in photographs, the one who would keep the family name clean and shiny and predictable, while I, in their eyes, was always a little sideways, a little uncertain. A little too much imagination and not enough stability. I remember my 16th birthday. I had been talking about going to a specific art exhibit for months. But that morning, Rachel announced she had been chosen to lead the school's debate team. My mother was so overcome with pride that she spent the whole day on the phone with relatives. By the evening, she was too tired to take me to the exhibit. "We'll go next month, Claire. Today belongs to Rachel's future." Next month never came. I'm a graphic designer, and I build my work the hard way, from late nights and cheap laptops and stubborn hope, and later, after my divorce, from the kind of necessity that teaches you how to keep moving even when you're tired in your bones, because you don't have the luxury of falling apart when a child is asking what's for dinner. I remember sitting at my kitchen table at 3 a.m., the blue light of the monitor stinging my eyes, while my mother's voice echoed in my head, telling me I should have just been a secretary like Rachel. I have 2 kids. Lucas is 9, and he has the sensitive eyes of someone who notices everything even when he pretends not to, and Emily is 7, and she laughs with her whole body, like she's trying to keep joy alive by force, as if joy is something you have to protect from the world the way you protect a small flame from wind. For years, my family had a tradition that looked harmless from the outside, the kind of thing people would describe as so sweet, the kind of thing mothers brag about in grocery store lines. Every summer, my mother hosted 2 weeks at her beach cottage. It wasn't a palace, it wasn't fancy, but it had that nostalgic kind of charm that made people sentimental, the smell of salt in the hallway, the old wooden steps that creaked in familiar ways, the photos on the wall of children holding ice cream cones, the porch where people sat in the evening and pretended their lives were simple. Rachel and her husband Daniel went every year with their 4 kids, and my mother prepared for them like royalty was arriving. New beach toys, special snacks the kids liked, extra pillows, fresh flowers, a fridge stocked like a magazine spread, and even when she called it just our family time, it felt like a performance staged for Rachel, as if my mother believed that if Rachel's life looked perfect enough, it proved something about her own success as a parent. And then there was me. Every year, in late March or early April, my mother would call me with the same voice, the same rhythm, the same apology that didn't apologize for anything. Claire, honey, I'm so sorry, but there's just not enough room this year. Sometimes she added reasons, as if reasons were bandages. The kids are getting older, and they need space. Rachel's family is so big now. Daniel works so hard, they really need this. And I learned how to respond with the kind of politeness that keeps peace but destroys truth. Of course, Mom. I understand. What I didn't understand, at least not at first, was how much damage a repeated sentence can do when it lands in the same place every year, like a stone dropped into a well, because at some point you stop hearing the words and you start hearing what they mean underneath. There isn't room for you. Not in the house, not in the story, not in the tradition, not in the family image. There isn't room. The first couple of years, I tried to be reasonable, because that's what women like me are taught to do, to be understanding, to be low maintenance, to be grateful for whatever crumbs fall in our direction, and I told myself it wasn't personal, it was logistics, it was space, it was complicated. I even offered to bring a tent and sleep in the backyard. My mother laughed. Oh, Claire, don't be dramatic. It's just not practical. But then my children started asking. Mom, Lucas asked one summer, sitting on the edge of my bed while the blue light of my phone showed Rachel's beach photos. Why don't we go to Grandma's beach house anymore? Emily climbed up beside him and stared at the screen, the way she always did when she saw her cousins doing something she wanted. Is Grandma mad at us? I looked at my children, and in that moment I felt something inside me split into two parts, because one part wanted to protect them from the truth, and the other part was tired of lying, tired of dressing pain up as a scheduling issue, tired of teaching my kids that being unwanted is something you quietly accept. So I told them the safe version first. It's just crowded there. Lucas didn't look away. But there are 4 bedrooms, he said, because he'd been there once when he was very small and still remembered it, remembered the bunk bed, remembered the porch swing. He remembered the specific smell of the cedar wood and the sound of the ocean at night. Emily frowned like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Then we can sleep on the sofa, she offered, and her voice was so casual, so willing to shrink herself, that it made my throat tighten. And that was the first time I realized the real problem wasn't the beach house. The real problem was what my children were learning about their place in the world. They were learning to volunteer for the sofa. They were learning to make themselves smaller. They were learning that love is a room you have to earn, and sometimes no matter how quiet you are, the door stays closed. That night, after I put them to bed, I went into the kitchen and stood there in the dark, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling the weight of things I hadn't said, and I promised myself that I would not raise my children to believe they deserved less just because someone else was louder, or easier, or more convenient to love. The breaking point didn't come with a dramatic explosion. It came with a sentence. It was my mother's birthday party in June, the year I landed my biggest client so far, a contract that meant I could breathe for the first time in a long time, that meant the lights would stay on without me doing math in my head, that meant maybe I could finally buy Emily the dance shoes she kept outgrowing and Lucas the soccer cleats he pretended he didn't care about. I told my mother the news in the kitchen while Rachel was in the living room laughing, and for one brief moment my mother looked impressed. "That's wonderful, dear," she said, and then, without missing a beat, she added, "Maybe now you can think about getting something more stable." As if my work wasn't real until someone else stamped it with approval. Rachel appeared behind her like a shadow that always knew where to stand. She smiled sweetly, in that way that's meant to look supportive but feels like a slap. "Claire loves playing on her computer," she said loud enough for the room to hear. "It's cute." Later that night, my mother pulled me aside, her glass of wine in her hand, her voice lowered into that conspiratorial tone she used when she wanted to feel like she was being kind. "Claire, honey," she said, "about the beach cottage, it's just not going to work this year. Rachel's family is so big, and Daniel has been exhausted, and the kids." Rachel cut in, because Rachel always cut in. "Maybe if you had a real job," she said. You could afford your own vacation. My mother nodded. Rachel has a point, she said, as if she was proud of that cruelty, as if she thought it was helpful. And I stood there, in my mother's kitchen, on my mother's birthday, while my sister and my mother teamed up to reduce my entire life into a joke, and I felt my face go still, the way it does when you stop reacting because something in you finally decides it's done begging. I didn't fight. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, nodded, and said, "Of course. I understand. Have a great time." But inside, something settled. Not rage, not revenge. A decision. That summer, while Rachel and her family took over the beach cottage, my children and I stayed home, and I watched Lucas's face when he saw the photos online, watched him pretend it didn't matter, watched Emily's voice go quieter when she asked if we could go somewhere, anywhere, and I realized that waiting for my family to change was like waiting for the ocean to apologize for drowning people. So I stopped waiting. I didn't buy a resort. I didn't do anything flashy. I did something simpler, and in a way braver. I rented a place. A large house 2 hours down the coast, not luxurious but comfortable, with a wide dining table, a backyard where kids could run, and a quiet strip of beach close enough that you could hear the waves at night if you left the windows open. I spent 3 weeks researching the perfect spot. I wanted a kitchen big enough for everyone to cook together, and a porch where no one was a guest, but everyone was home. And I planned a weekend. Not for revenge. For repair. For my children. For that part of me that had spent years swallowing disappointment. I invited the people who had always been kind, the relatives who had noticed, the ones who sent birthday cards, the aunt who once slipped Emily a little envelope of cash and whispered, "For dance class," like she was trying to keep a dream alive. I invited my Uncle Thomas and Aunt Linda, and my cousin David and his wife, and even the Martinez family, second cousins who never had much money but always had warmth. They were the people who were always invited to the big events but never the intimate ones. I wanted them to know they were first on my list. I did not invite my mother. I did not invite Rachel. I didn't announce it. I didn't make a speech. I simply made space. The week before the trip, Lucas asked me, cautiously, like he was afraid to hope, "Are we really going?" "Yes," I told him, and the way he exhaled felt like a child letting go of a burden he didn't know he was carrying. When we arrived, Emily ran into the house first and stopped in the dining room. The table was huge, the kind of table you imagine in family movies, the kind where everyone is supposed to belong. "How many people can sit here?" she asked. "At least 12, I said. She placed her small hand on the wood as if she needed to feel it to believe it was real. "Then we're not too many," she whispered. And that sentence, that tiny sentence from a 7-year-old, hit me harder than any insult Rachel had ever thrown at me, because it revealed what I'd been trying not to see. My children weren't just sad about missing a vacation, they were internalizing a story that said they were the problem, that they were the reason there wasn't room, that their presence was a complication. That night, after everyone arrived and we ate together, something happened that my family's traditions had never given me. People asked about my life and actually listened. Not the polite, "How's work?" That disappears the moment you answer, but real attention. Uncle Thomas looked at me over his plate and said, "You've done well, Claire. I know you have. I've seen your work. I'm proud of you. I saw that brand you designed for the tech company. It was brilliant." My throat tightened. Not because I needed praise, but because I realized how starved I'd been for basic recognition. Later, when the kids were asleep and the adults sat on the porch with the sea air around us, my Aunt Linda leaned closer. "Your mom's been wrong," she said quietly. "She's been wrong for a long time. She confused popularity with family, and she chose the wrong daughter to build her world around." I didn't argue. I didn't defend my mother. I simply stared out at the darkness beyond the porch light and said, "I know." And then, unexpectedly, I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a silent release, tears sliding down my face while I kept breathing, because it felt safe, because for the first time I wasn't crying in secret to protect my mother's image. I was crying in the presence of people who didn't ask me to pretend. The next morning, Emily woke up early and ran outside barefoot, and when she came back and she was glowing. "Mom," she said, "the beach is right there, and nobody said we can't go." I knelt in front of her and brushed her hair back, and I felt something in me soften, something that had been locked up for years. "Yeah," I whispered. "Nobody can say that here. Here, the beach belongs to you just as much as anyone else." By the time we drove home, my phone had a message from my mother. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a question. It was a demand disguised as confusion. "Thomas says you had a big weekend with everyone. Why wasn't I told about it? I am your mother, Claire. This is incredibly disrespectful." I stared at the screen, and for a moment I felt the old instinct rise. The instinct to explain, to smooth, to repair, to take responsibility for someone else's feelings. The old urge to say, "I'm sorry, I just thought you were busy." And then I thought about Emily's whispered sentence. "Then we're not too many." I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Claire," she said, already sharp. "What is this I'm hearing? You hosted a family reunion and skipped me?" "It's true," I said calmly. "I rented a place. We had family over. And you didn't invite me," she snapped. "Or Rachel. Your own sister." "No," I said. There was a silence that sounded like disbelief. "But why?" she asked, as if she genuinely couldn't imagine a world where she didn't automatically deserve inclusion. I could have given her 100 examples, 8 years' worth of them, but I didn't. I chose one truth, the simplest one. "Because you've spent years telling me there wasn't room," I said. "So I made room somewhere else. I took you at your word, Mom. You said the cottage was full? So I found a place that wasn't." "That's different," she insisted. "That's not the same at all. We are your immediate family." "It is," I said, my voice steady. "You just don't like what it feels like on your side of the door." My mother's breath came faster, like she was offended by the idea that consequences could exist. "Claire, you're being petty. You're trying to hurt me because of a few logistical issues." I closed my eyes. So I didn't argue about whether I was petty. I said what mattered. "Emily asked me if we were too many," I said. "That's what your no room has done. It made my kids feel like they're the problem. It made them feel like they were a burden on your life. I won't let them feel that way anymore." Silence. Not the polite silence this time. A stunned one. For a second, I thought she might actually understand. And then she said very softly, "I never meant for them to feel that way. I was just trying to keep Rachel happy because things have been so hard for her." "I know," I said. "But they did. And they are my priority now, not Rachel's happiness." She tried to shift, to blame logistics, to make it about bedrooms and space and schedules, but I didn't let her. "Mom," I said, "I offered for years to pay for food, utilities, anything. I offered to bring air mattresses. I offered to sleep in the car. I offered to make it work. You didn't want it to work. You wanted the house to look a certain way, and we didn't fit that image." "That's not true," she said quickly. "It is," I replied. "And I'm done teaching my kids that love is something they have to fight for. I'm done teaching them that they should be grateful for the crumbs of your time." My mother's voice changed, growing cold, defensive. "So what, you're cutting us off now? You're going to be one of those daughters who disappears?" I exhaled slowly. "No," I said. "I'm cutting off the version of us where I smile through disrespect. I'm cutting off the version where my kids watch their cousins get everything and they get scraps. I'm cutting off the version where I'm grateful for being tolerated. If you want to be in our lives, you have to prove there is room. Real room." She tried to cry then, and maybe the tears were real, but I didn't move toward them the way I used to, because I finally understood something. Tears aren't proof of love, sometimes they're just proof that a person hates losing control. Rachel called me that evening. She didn't say hello. She went straight into anger. What the hell is wrong with you? She demanded. Mom's devastated. She's been crying for hours. You've always been so jealous of the cottage, but this is a new low. I listened calmly, letting her spill her outrage the way she always had, the way she believed her feelings deserved immediate attention. When she finally paused, I said, Do you know what Emily asked me? She asked if we were too many. Rachel scoffed. Oh my God, don't make this about the kids. This is about you being vindictive. It is about the kids, I said. It has always been about the kids. Yours got to feel wanted. Mine had to wonder why they weren't. Yours got new toys and fresh flowers. Mine got an apology and a locked door. You're twisting everything. She snapped. The beach cottage is small. It's just reality. You're being dramatic. And the reality in my house, I said, is that I'm not making my children beg for space anymore. If the cottage is too small for us, then the cottage is too small for our relationship. Goodbye, Rachel. She called me vindictive. She called me selfish. She told me I thought I was better than them. And the strangest thing happened while she talked. I realized her words weren't hurting me. They were bouncing off something solid inside me, something I'd built without anyone noticing, self-respect. When she finally ran out of insults, I said, Rachel, you can be angry. But you can't rewrite what you did for years. You enjoyed being chosen. You enjoyed being the favorite. You enjoyed me being the afterthought. And now that I've stopped playing the part, you're scared. Because without me to look down on, you're just a woman in a small cottage. Then I hung up. The months that followed were quieter than people might expect, not because the conflict disappeared, but because I stopped feeding it. My mother tried to invite us to Thanksgiving and promised it would be different, and when I asked where my children would sit, she said, We'll figure it out. The same sentence she'd used for years, and I realized that we'll figure it out was always code for you'll adjust and your kids will sit on the floor while Rachel's kids sit at the table. So I didn't go. Instead, I cooked at my own house, and my Aunt Linda brought pie, and my Uncle Thomas brought a ridiculous inflatable turkey decoration that made the kids laugh until they snorted, and for the first time in a long time, I watched my children eat without feeling like they had to earn their place at the table. We had music, we had laughter, and we had room. On Christmas, my mother sent gifts that were suddenly larger, more expensive, as if she could buy back the years with an Amazon order. She sent a designer dollhouse for Emily and a top-tier gaming console for Lucas. I thanked her. But I didn't give her access. Because boundaries aren't punishment. They're protection. The deepest moment came one evening in January, after the holiday noise had faded and life returned to its normal pace. Lucas was doing homework at the kitchen table, Emily was coloring, and I was answering emails from a client when Lucas suddenly put his pencil down and said, Mom, can I ask you something? His voice had that careful tone again, the tone kids use when they're afraid the truth might break something. Yeah, I said, turning toward him. He stared at the paper for a second and then asked, Does Grandma not like me? Emily looked up, her eyes wide, as if she'd been holding the same question and didn't know if she was allowed to say it. My chest tightened. I walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat between them. Grandma loves you, I said slowly. But Grandma has a problem with showing love fairly. She thinks love is like a pie, and if she gives too much to one person, she won't have enough for the other. Lucas's eyebrows pulled together. Like she shows more love to Noah and Sophie in them? Yes, I admitted. Emily's voice went small. Is it because we're bad? No, I said. You are not bad. You are not too much. You are not the reason. The reason is inside Grandma, not inside you. Lucas swallowed hard. So why did she do it? Why did she say there was no room? I leaned closer. Some people love in a way that makes others feel safe. And some people love in a way that makes others feel like they have to compete. Grandma chose to make it a competition. We are choosing to stay out of the race. Like Aunt Linda? Emily whispered. Yes, I said. Like Aunt Linda. Like Uncle Thomas. Like the people who show up and make room without you having to ask. That night, after they went to bed, I cried again, not from grief, but from relief. I realized I had finally broken the cycle. In spring, my mother tried again. Claire, she said, I miss the kids. Can we just move past this? I'll make sure there's room this summer. I'll tell Rachel she has to share. It will take you saying you were wrong, I told her, and apologizing to Lucas and Emily. Not to me. To them. You need to tell them why they weren't invited for 8 years. I don't know if I can do that, she said. That seems very extreme. Then we're done, I answered. Summer came again. Rachel posted her photos of the cottage. My mother posted hers. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the familiar twist of humiliation. I didn't feel the need to hide my phone or cry in the bathroom. We took a trip of our own to a mountain cabin with a lake. One night, as we sat watching the sky darken and the stars begin to pop through the velvet blue, Lucas leaned against my shoulder. You know what's nice, Mom? He said. What? That here, nobody has to decide if there's room for us. We just belong. And that was the real victory. I stopped knocking on doors that were held shut from the inside. And when I did, I finally built a life where my children never have to ask if they're welcome. Because here, there is always room. Not because I'm generous, but because I refuse to make love conditional. And that's the inheritance I choose to leave my kids. I want them to grow up knowing that they are enough, that they are worthy of space, and that they never, ever have to volunteer for the sofa. Some stories don't end with apologies. They end with understanding. And some tables are built not out of wood, but out of the courage to say, no more. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. Thank you for listening. This was Block Tales.